All right, we are live. Take two.
Okay, this is the second part of this meeting. We sort of lost everyone temporarily. The next item on the agenda is approval of the fiscal year 2021-2022 operating budget and tax rates. And I believe we have Angela Fogel.
Yeah, and I move the item.
Yes, and the mayor moved the item. Thank you.
So the budget that you said on page 83 of your agenda, this is the same budget that was approved for the tentative approved phase of the budget by the BET. This is a 0% increase for the Board of Ed. It totals 0%, but there is a $52,000 increase because the MBR is calculated on the revised budget. So any rollover that the Board of Ed receives, that is included in the MBR. So I had to include that $52,000, which was the rollover from the prior year. What closed the gap this year so that the tax rate is roughly unchanged from prior year is the $12.9 million of ARP funding. So the departments were fully funded. When we were going through the process after the recommended budget, you'll recall that there was a request to the departments to cut 0.5% from their budgets, which they did, and some departments cut more than that. Those cuts were restored at the tentative approved stage. So nothing has changed since your tentative approved budget. And this is fully funding every department, but with a 0% increase for the Board of Ed. And you'll see at the bottom of page 83, it's relatively flat. It's a 0.1% increase from prior year. And that is in accordance with the ARP money. The restriction is that it cannot be used for tax cuts. So it satisfies that requirement.
Okay. Let me ask you a question, Angela, about so whatever we provide the Board of Ed this year, the Board of Ed received federal dollars as well as the city, and presumably they will fund their budget in part based on those dollars. So yeah, I think so. It's clear that whatever the Board of Ed receives this year will be will count against the MBR next year, correct? So it's not going to. So in other words, even though they have additional dollars at their disposal to spend on whatever initiatives the Board of Ed deems important, that will not affect the MBR. Those additional dollars will not affect the MBR for next year.
Correct. The Board of Ed, they're doing what the city is doing, and they're closing their gap with their federal assistance. But that will not, even though they're closing a gap, that will not go into the MBR calculation. So the city will only be required to match the $208.5 million plus any rollovers that the Board of Ed receives from the city this year. The Board of Ed was expecting, I know I watched some of their finance committee meetings. They are not expecting to have a surplus this year, but they do currently have a surplus.
I see. Okay. Are there any other questions concerning that?
My concern is that given that we're here with their budget issues, I think that next year they're going to have some problems. So I feel like next year we're going to probably have to have a really interesting conversation, because I think that the money that they're getting now is, like you said, it's to fulfill some budgetary items, but I think some of the long-term issues, such as some of the learning that did not take place for many of the children who may now be behind because of the online learning, I think some of that's going to come up to bite us next year. So just kind of putting that out there.
I think that the monies are coming in over the course of 2 years.
Mhm,
And so it's really at the end of the second year, I think that there might be an issue, but
mhm,
I mean, I think that to the extent that these dollars are used to have students catch up on whatever learning loss they occurred because of COVID, and any one-time expenditures that there might be,
mhm.
I think we can lessen that cliff significantly. So let's hope that that's what happens.
Fingers
And
crossed.
assuming that's
Mhm.
possible, but
In addition, we need to remember that we are going to do an efficiency study this year, which should also help to find opportunities to invest more effectively across the board.
Right.
Ms. Brown's comment is absolutely right. I mean, the chairman's comment is too. It's not necessarily a cliff next year. It's a 2-year cliff, but hopefully all the other actions can mitigate that.
I agree.
Any other questions? All right, all in favor of approving the fiscal year 2021-2022 operating budget and tax rates as proposed, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, the budget's been approved by the BET at least.
Thank you, Andy.
Great, thank you, Angela. Next up is Oak Hills. We have some new financials and some, I think, positive news to report, I hope.
Sure, yeah. Just if I may, to get ahead of the minutes revisions for next month, my last name here is spelled with an I at the end, but it should be an O at the end. And just go. So the financials that are in the packet are a bit dated. They're through March, but I'll chat about them really quickly because it's a good news story. It's up about, the net operating income is up about 40,000 versus prior year, which prior year was a net operating loss of 35. So we turned a small profit in March. The year-over-year comps become difficult right now because the COVID restrictions began mid-March, which shut us down from March 15th through May 8th. So the year-over-year comps are not so great, but just as a point of reference, we are doing a lot better than last March. A lot of that is some current things. So golf fees are up. The actual earnings that we're getting from rounds and from carts are up. And that's not just due to rate increases, that's due to more rounds being played. But also things that kind of lead towards the future are season passes and our just membership cards are significantly up. And not just versus prior year, which was impacted by COVID, but by versus years before that as well. So those ID cards are kind of a little bit of a down payment that people are making to play more golf during the year. And the season passes are definitely a large down payment that people are making to play more golf during the year. So those are kind of good portents for the future to say that the golf demand may be up. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute though. April was also strong. I don't have the final financials for April as it takes a little while to kind of process those. But the strong rounds continued, and there were a couple of extra expenses due to some agricultural and chemical expenses that needed to be kind of brought back up to the levels that we need them at to make it through the season. So that's just a kind of normal course of doing business that ebbs and flows during the season. Our cash position end of March was 254,000, which is, this is a really good number, 444,000 more than it was the prior year. We had already drawn into our line of credit 190,000 end of March last year, and we are at zero. So basically, we're in a much better cash position, just wildly better cash position. As such, we're kind of, I've as the treasurer of Oak Hills, I've put in some procedures for how to spend money. It's a very good position to be in, but we haven't been in it for a long time, and we we didn't have very strong financial checks and regulations and procedures on how to spend that money. So I've put in some thresholds where approval can be done by the executive committee, some thresholds larger where approval must be done by the full board. And we'll work with that. We'll tweak it as we go, hopefully for many years to come. We are working on the FY22 budget, which follows the same city schedule. So it starts on July 1st. We are specifically focused on really 4 things. Our repayments to the city. We're very cognizant of the fact that we go up from $2 per round to $2.05 per round, starting on July 1st. So we're working that in. And also the one-time 1% of gross revenue payment that we make. We're also cognizant of a stipulation of our lease, which is where half of our restaurant revenue is intended to be deposited into a capital reserve account up to $250,000. We don't expect to have half of our restaurant revenue to be $250,000 anytime soon. It'll probably take several years, but we are cognizant of that and we'll account for it. We're actually creating a separate account that will house that money. Third thing is wage increases. We just know that there's contractual wage increases with minimum wage and some other things. And fourth is COVID restrictions expiring May 19th. I'm interested to see how any demand shifts occur after that as people start traveling again. And, I'm thinking of this in terms of those bigger things where people are going on vacation again and obviously not around to play golf. And then some smaller things, just like, for a while, nobody had to be home for a restaurant reservation or something like that. They could kind of take the afternoon and the evening to go play golf. And that's, that may not be the case anymore. I don't expect that to be the biggest thing, but if that's 3-4 rounds a day that get eaten up by that other plans, over time it can be meaningful. So we'll continue to monitor that. And as we make this budget, we're not going to go gangbusters and assume that what we're experiencing right now is going to occur throughout the entire season. I think there will be a little bit of a cutback, and we'll certainly budget for that because my watchwords for budgets are generally, kind of go reasonable on revenue, but, kind of expect some expenses that may not be foreseen. So, that's the lay of the land. I'm happy to talk through any questions on March financials. I don't have all the details on April yet, so I won't be able to talk through that.
Yeah, hi, Joe. This is Troy Gellred. How are you? Thank you for coming and thank you for the update. A couple of quick questions. One, give us an update on the restaurant. I saw some emails that I'm there pretty often, and I know May 1st was a date for the halfway house and June 1st was a date for the restaurant. Talk a little about, I know it's the dry dock. How were they selected? I wasn't sure about that. You tell me how they were selected.
There were a couple of folks that were spoken to, and this particular vendor, which is Dry Dock, I think the LLC is Dry Dock Smoke and Aces, but it's associated with Dry Dock. They had a significant leg up because of their existing experience with golf course food and beverage operations at Silvermine, and because they're kind of a Norwalk brand. So as we kind of continued speaking to a couple of the different folks that were interested in it, they stood out as, the folks who really knew how to come in and make this a kind of symbiotic relationship. And so over time, it just became obvious that these were the best folks for the specific feature sort of restaurant that we have at the course. And, as we spoke through some of the license contract things, they were quite amenable to them. So it kind of just worked out to be a good pairing.
So bids, you're saying bids went out, or was it an RFP situation, or?
It was not an RFP situation, no.
That's not required?
Not per our guidance from legal, it wasn't required, no.
Okay. And the timing of when they're opening or what?
Yeah, so when the operator got in and discovered the condition of both the halfway house and the restaurant, especially the kitchen, it became obvious that there was going to be some extra work needed. And so I don't know the exact timing, but I don't believe the halfway house is open yet, but that's coming soon. That's been basically brought up to code, and we just need the stamp of approval that it's up to code. And then the restaurant building, we've met last week as an authority to approve capital expenses to bring that up to code and where it really needs to be to open and kind of have a good showing at its opening. So we're excited about that. They're shooting for June 1st on that. I'm certainly hopeful that it'll happen.
Thank you.
And-
They've been pretty good on giving information on the website, the Oak Hills website, but if they would continue, that would be great. And by the way, the course is in great condition. Jim has done a great job, and Paul so far. So thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Joe, typically, at least in my experience, when restaurants lease space, they invest in whatever they need to invest in for, to upgrade the kitchens and, things like that. Assuming that they have a long-term lease, it makes sense for them to do that. Is this a short-term lease? And is that why Dry Dock is not investing some of its dollars in the upgrade in the kitchen?
Yeah, it's a little different. It's a 5-year agreement, but it is a license agreement, and there's opt-outs built in at 3 years by the operator. And I believe, I can't remember if it's 60 or 90 days notice termination, but at any time, either and it's mutual, right? So it's a little bit of a different setup. And I think that's why there was some confusion about the term long-term lease versus license agreement. And we're working through that with the council. But because of that, it's really, we consider it to be the Oak Hills Park Authority or the Oak Hills restaurant sort of thing that is being licensed out to Dry Dock. And because of that short-term termination sort of thing, we want to be able to make it turnkey for a next operator to be able to come in. So we think it's actually a strategic move to fund some of these improvements to make sure that there's refrigerators working, make sure that there's an ice maker there. It'll be on our balance sheet as our assets.
Okay.
Joe, is this is a licensing agreement that they're going to pay us X number of dollars per month? Plus,
Indeed, no, it's revenue based and it's gross revenue based.
So it's not a minimum. It's going to be just a flat percentage. Tell me what the terms are.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing?
If you could tell me what the terms are.
Sure. I'm going from memory, but I have a fairly good memory. I believe it's 10% of gross revenue, and that's gross revenue just on the food items and food and beverage items, right? So we're taking out of that any gratuities that get paid to the staff, and we're taking that out of that any sales tax that gets collected. And that's a limited for the first year at $60,000 and unlimited thereafter. So if they make $1 million in gross revenue, we get 100 of that and so on up. So it's kind of a mutual success agreement.
But the first year you said it's limited to a max of 60,000 that this you could make.
Paid to us, yes.
And I think excluded also was liquor, more importantly. That's probably the most important thing, right? In that revenue number?
No, that's not true.
In that formula?
The beverage cart is excluded, and that's mostly because the operator is going to actually procure that beverage cart on their own. And so, that's kind of separate from that, but any beverages that get sold in the halfway house or in the restaurant building, they would be included.
Oh, okay. I thought I read something different. Okay.
Yeah, I think there was some
so
confusion on that, but
Yeah, in the paper, I think it
clarified.
just said liquor was excluded, but now you're saying it's just for the cart situation.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're going to be guaranteed about 60,000 a year.
Up to 60 for the first year.
Up to 60 for the first year, assuming they're able to bring in 600 in gross revenue.
That's the max number.
That would be the max number in the first year. And then thereafter, it would be however, whatever 10% of their gross revenue is.
Do we have a sense of what, do you have a sense of what, just based on prior performance of like the prior restaurants, what the anticipated gross revenue in the first year might be?
I would not use the prior restaurant operation as a guide for this new operator. This new operator believes that they will be exceeding the 60,000 minimum
In the first year?
regularly. I'm not exactly sure in the first year that they will, because there's a couple of things. But they expect to be well over the 60,000 mark in subsequent years.
Okay, so another question, though. You mentioned that the Gulf Authority now is going to fund some of these improvements that need to be done. Some of them were the result of non-conforming additions, I guess, that were put in by the previous operator.
I would
How do we
characterize them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no, go ahead, finish.
I would characterize them more as non-conforming removals and destructions that needed to be remedied.
So over the course, this was just when he left?
I don't
I'm
know
not
the
blaming you.
specifics.
I'm just saying, what concerns me now is that, our history with the Gulf Authority's history with running a food and beverage operation is less than stellar. How are you going to keep track of what's going on in that operation so that we don't get into this isn't an annual deal where we keep on looking for the next operator that's going to take over?
We built some things into, to go deeper into the stipulations of the contracts. We built certain things in to the contract. So we prescribed exactly certain levels of financials that had to be disclosed to us on a quarterly basis, because that's the timing of the payments that are going to come to us. So one, we basically said, you've got to give us at least this level of detail. And in short order, we expect to prepare a schedule, which will actually say exactly what level of detail we want. But we brought it down to a pretty granular level so that we can track things like what's being sold through the beverage cart, and is that way outsized versus everything else, i.e., maybe they're kind of pushing sales more towards the beverage cart because they know they get all of that versus 90% of somewhere place else. So we feel like we have a control there. And finally, not something that we necessarily want to do on a regular basis, but we put in a stipulation to be able to audit the restaurant financials once a year, if we so think that should be, if we have suspicion to believe that there might be something going on. So we think that we've got the protections in place to make sure that, we're kind of getting a better sense of exactly what the operations are there. Overall, those were two stipulations that I definitely wanted to have in that contract. I wouldn't have
Right, because you're the financial guy, that's why.
Well, maybe.
But what about from an operational standpoint? I mean, it's all well and good to have the financial controls in place. But what about operational? How do we know that the guy's doing the right thing? How do we know that the decision he's making to go this way or that way or whatever? Does the Gulf Authority have some people that are familiar with this?
We do. We have one authority member who is in the restaurant business. It's not quite the exact same thing, but certainly in the food services business. So we've relied on him quite a bit. That's Mr. Sheikh on the authority. We've relied on him quite a bit and his expertise to tell us kind of exactly what the financials of a restaurant generally look like and what would be the right terms to put in place. And he was really trying to work with the old operator as well to bring them up to snuff. And he finds that the things that, he may be, I won't say that, but he finds that he does not need to give any pointers to this new operator. This new operator is a very seasoned professional in the business. But we still have kind of the expertise that we think, at least it's one person on the board to be able to watch that. And, I wouldn't give short shrift to the level of information about operations that the financial statements can give us.
No. Don't get me wrong. I fully back up what you just said. I question why it hadn't been done earlier. But you're the new guy on the block, so you get away with it.
Joe, hi, this is Sherry. So I have some questions.
Hi, Sherry.
So given we've had some challenges with the restaurants being there before, does this particular organization, is there a timeline in place? For instance, if they don't meet that revenue number, are they on some kind of a schedule when they have to attain that? And if not, is there a contingency plan? You mentioned 600,000, right? Did you mention 600,000 in revenue for the first year?
That would be the implied, like they're capped out at 60 in payments to us. So
Right,
that would
okay.
be the implied 10% of the 600 would be 60.
Right. So if they don't, so do they have a specific time? That's for the year, correct?
Mhm.
That's what you're expecting for the year. So if they don't make that in a year, then what happens? Do they get more time? Did they get another year?
Oh, no. There's no minimum that they must pay us. And that's partially because this business is, especially the
Right.
golf course business, is extremely seasonal.
Right.
And so they'll have expected to have less foot traffic in February when
I
there's
would think so.
0 golfers coming in. So we
Right.
didn't want to put any monthly, minimums in that they would have to pay us.
Right.
We actually tried that with the old operator to kind of stage the payments of the rent, skew that more towards when they were actually bringing revenue in, and that was
Mhm.
not effective.
Didn't work.
But overall, no, it's a flat 10%. If they're not able to come up to a reasonable level of income, and we think based on the expertise that we have and based on the feedback that we're getting,
Right.
that they should be able to get there. I mean, naturally, our first step would be to work with them and see what can be
course.
done.
Right.
After that, we would have to probably part ways. We shouldn't
Right.
necessarily be afraid of parting ways if something isn't
Of
working.
course. This is the
Exactly.
people who own Dry Dock, right? Right.
Correct.
They think they changed the name a little bit, but okay.
For this
LLC
one,
is
yeah,
different.
they kind of tried to skew it a little bit more towards golf.
Okay. Thanks.
But I
Is
think
this
the
sort of,
important thing is that they do operate the silver mine facility, right?
Correct.
right, yeah, so that was my question. Is this a similar arrangement that they have with Silvermine, or is it?
No,
Different.
a private club has a very different arrangement where there's spend minimums for food and beverage. So, I mean, that would not work with our model at all as a municipal sort of setup. So it is a bit different, but the idea of knowing, already coming in knowing what 90% of golfers are going to want to eat, right? This is kind of a important aspect of running that business.
So,
Yeah,
so Jim,
I've been to the facility at Silver Mine and it's run very well. As a matter of fact, I believe some of the help that work at Silver Mine worked at Oak Hills at one time or another. So keep your fingers crossed.
right. So Joe, just in summary, the big difference here is in the past, you would just have a tenant come in, pay the rent monthly, and they would keep the profits and they would pay the rent and that's it. Now we're in partnership with this organization and they will just give us 10% of whatever the top line revenue is, except for the golf cart that you had mentioned. And I assume that somehow you guys are going to have somebody there to make sure that those revenues are the accurate revenues, I assume, right? Yeah.
Oh, sure. I mean, we have all of our financial person is going to be there. Literally, the office is next to the restaurant. So, I mean,
That's
they're
Mark.
able
You're
to-
talking about Mark? Mark
Correct.
Gardner?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So we'll have, I mean, his title is controller, and we'll kind of have him watching the financials very closely.
Good. Good luck.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And thank you for that, Joe. That was, as usual, a very thorough and clear presentation and a good story.
Sure.
We
Happy to do
appreciate
it.
Any other questions? Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Is there anything else on the agenda that we should be
I
discussing?
move that we adjourn.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Good night, all.